Hello everyone, Amer back with another Mission Impossible episode review. This time we've got Season 7, Episode 7, which is called Underground. So we start this one at a prison where a fellow named Gunther Schell is being transported to a new facility. The sheriff's car gets stuck because of a stalled car, and from a manhole below, an anesthetic is fired into it, knocking out everyone inside the car. The lock is blown off, and two guys put Schell into their car and drive off, heading away spy hunter style into a waiting van. Jim gets instructions at some sort of outdoor Japanese restaurant using spy speak with a lady named Miyoshi. The mission is simple. Schell is a syndicate's expert at hiding money, and the IMF must find him and his records, or recover the money, something to that effect. In the apartment scene, we find that the IMF is looking for a gang of some sort that targets people such as Schell who know where money is hidden, with the promise that they will help them escape the country. But instead they drug their targets for information, according to one victim who managed to escape. The IMF has a substance which will make the diabetic Schell sick, and also another ear implant for Jim, who has been hypnotized to only respond to Barney's voice when under pressure. And the implant is also a tracker with a 2-mile range. The newspaper runs a story that Dr. Jim is wanted for murder, and Barney comes to a place called the Wheelhouse, where apparently the gang launches their operations, saying that he's a PI named George Carter and tells the bartender he's trying to get Jim out of the country, and figures the barkeep might know people who can help. The bartender plays coy, but makes a call as Barney leaves. The call to Barney's office comes fairly quickly, and Barney meets the dudes that we saw earlier, who take him to the zoo to meet with the gang's apparent leader, who we later learn is named Clavering. Barney is told to get Jim to come to a park in the morning with $50,000, and Clavering is assured that Barney has been checked out. He is actually a PI. Meanwhile, Schell's boss Lutz is trying to explain how he doesn't know where the syndicate's $27 million is hidden, as Lutz doesn't know anything at all about the gang, doesn't even know they exist, and figures Schell will contact him when he can. The syndicate dudes give him 48 hours to come up with the cash. Clavering and his man Takis meet with Jim, who put him in their car with Barney and Willie following from a distance. They head to a warehouse where Jim is put in a casket for secret transport. The coffin is lined with lead, so the signal is lost, and Barney says that for now Jim is on his own. The crew heads to a fairly opulent building, which apparently is also an honest-to-goodness funeral parlor, and the casket is wheeled into a room. And now we have the moment that everyone remembers from this episode, if you've seen it before, where we see that Schell is being subjected to weird psychedelic lights and crazed sounds that are apparently driving him somewhat insane, whilst in a chair that spins him in all directions. Overseeing this is Dr. Hargreaves, who tells an impatient Clavering that he's doing his best to get Schell to talk, but Schell continues to refuse to reveal his hiding place. Barney visits Lutz, telling him that he represented a customer who was trapped by the gang but escaped, and tells him that they have Schell. Barney asks for $50,000 for his services, half now, half on delivery, and Lutz has no choice but to trust him. Jim wakes up, picking the lock to his room and heading to the basement, where he finds a vent into which he can release a substance which will mess with Schell's condition, and manages to get back to his room so he can be drugged and put in the chair. Clavering and Hargreaves quickly get frustrated at Jim not answering them due to the hypnotic suggestion. Hargreaves believes that he must be under some kind of hypnosis, so Jim gets a disturbing disorientation as well, for a full 2 television minutes. Schell goes into what seems to be a diabetic coma, and Hargreaves says they need a specialist to help him. Clavering suddenly realizes he has one in Jim, who is taken out of the room and given the antidote to whatever he was given earlier, with Takis saying that he just fainted. Clavering says his arrangements have been made, but he has to help Schell first before he gets out of the country. Jim goes through the motions of diagnosing a blood clot in the lungs, requiring an operation which Clavering demands he performs immediately. Jim says he can't do it without an anesthesiologist, so Takis goes to get Dr. Willie, who they take blindfolded to their lair, with Barney and Casey following them. They get there, and Jim's implant starts to work so that Barney and Casey can hear what's going on. Jim and Willie examine Schell further, put on small masks where Willie activates the latch on his doctor's bag, which spews out knockout gas. They wheel Shell out and head towards the exit, but find the real funeral parlor attendant there with a gun. Barney is able to run in and punch the guy out so that the IMF can get away with Shell. Barney calls Shell, while the attendant tells Clavering all he could tell is that it was a black man who hit him, and Clavering figures it must be Barney S. Carter. Barney calls Lutz and tells him that he's retrieved Shell, so Lutz rushes over to his office where Shell says he can't really remember much about what happened to him, so he's not sure if their stash is safe. Willie puts a tracker on their car. Lutz's man prepares to shoot Barney, but Barney demonstrates that he has protection behind a two-way mirror in the form of Jim. As Lutz and his crew head away, the IMF follow them, with Clavering not far behind. Shell heads to what appears to be an abandoned factory, finding a stashed key which opens a locker containing the loot. The IMF comes up behind him, and fortunately there's a mirror, which allows Jim to spot Clavering and Tackus behind him. There's some gunplay, but Willie is able to keep Tackus at bay as conventional law enforcement arrives and takes the bad guys away, and the IMF heads off. Mission accomplished. I'm going to give this episode a grade of a C-. I think that this one is a better episode and therefore deserves a slightly better grade than a lot of the episodes we've seen so far in Season 7, which have kind of been in the D+, D- range. What I like about it is that even though it borrows from a lot of older plots and older episodes, it's a unique idea for a story. It's different than things we've seen before. The setting is somewhat unique in terms of this mortuary. I read from the notes. I don't know whether it was a Mission Impossible dossier book or somewhere else, that this is actually a library building in Los Angeles. But from the outside. But again, the idea is kind of neat. It's the story and the screenplay, I would say, is decently executed. Just as an example for things that it reminds me of, the whole episode is rather similar to the season 6 episode Mind Bend. For the psychological workover of a target. The ear implant thing, where Jim has an implant where he won't respond unless Barney is feeding him information. That comes from the episode The Martyr back in season 4. The ending is borrowed from Invasion from season 6. It might actually be the same building in the end from the ending of Invasion. It certainly looks similar, so it could very well be. In looking back at the episodes Mind Bend and Martyr, I gave both of those a grade of D. And I do think that this is somewhat of a better story than The Martyr. And I believe that the antagonists are more engaging than Mind Bend. From that episode, I remember that I called the antagonists, and I stick by this, just hapless nitwits. Here, at least, the antagonists do seem somewhat competent. Also good. I really liked the opening sequence where the bad guys, the antagonists, again, I'll talk about a little bit later about how, again, there's that whole question about antagonists and bad guys. Get the opening sequence where they get Gunther Shell away from police custody is very, very neat. They block the car, the transport car, and then a guy's hiding in a manhole underneath and fires an anesthetic into the car. That's actually pretty well executed. That's something I would expect the IMF to pull off, frankly. So I did like that sequence. There's a good guest cast, quality actors here. Peter Mark Richmond is back as Dr. Hargreaves. Again, if we're talking about hearkening back to other episodes, this is very, very similar to going back to My Friend, My Enemy, right? He's playing almost exactly the same role as this kind of evil psychiatrist with nefarious means for doing things. And Peter Mark Richmond is just perfect for that kind of role. He's got the right face and mannerisms for it. Great casting choice there. Also good, H.M. Wynant, who plays Gunther Shell in this one, is really good. Yeah, he really, really makes me believe in what's going on with that character. We've seen him before. The first time you would have remembered him was back in season 4. He was the creepy lab assistant from the Controllers, if you remember that. And I think he's been in a couple of episodes since. Here, when he's going through the whole thing with the psychedelic room, again, his face and mannerisms, like he's making me believe that this guy's really messed up and disoriented. So I like that. And even after he gets rescued, so to speak, he's been through a lot. I guess it's been like a couple of days or whatever. And, he's not in good shape. And you can kind of see the tiredness and the haggardness just in the way that he moves and he speaks. And I thought that that was really, really good. The other guest stars are good. The problem is there's a lot of them, especially even a guy like Robert Middleton, who plays Clavering here. He's a guy who normally I would expect in an episode like this to get a lot more time. A lot of these stars are quality actors, but they just don't get the time to really make, a major contribution to the show and kind of stand out. So that's what I'll say in terms of the good. Moving on to things that are not so good. I didn't really like the fact that so much time was spent on the whole psychedelic room thing. We have Jim in that room for a solid 2 minutes of television time. And that's a testament to the fact that while it is a decently executed script, this story plods at times, to say the least. Also, despite what seems to be a big problem in that, the Barney loses track of Jim, and he can't use the tracker because Jim is put into this lead-lined casket. The IMF has really prepared well, and in the end, there's not a very high degree of difficulty to this mission. I can attribute a little bit of that to some lameness on the part of the antagonists. That, these are guys who are just, they've got this racket going on where basically they're just after money. So, they can be a little bit easily manipulated, through the means, through the promise of getting a big score. So the IMF just basically used that. Also, some things that I found that were not so great. It's really notable how Casey is literally just a driver in this episode. Of course, we understand why. Linda Day George, by the time this episode was filmed, was very, very heavily pregnant. But it's very, very noticeable in this one. I would say even more so than the couple of episodes that we've already seen her in. And again, the IMF, I feel, is really kind of reacting rather than acting, which I've commented about in some other episodes. They're just leading the targets through the steps that they have planned. And there doesn't seem to really be any risk to the mission overall. There's the odd kind of little wild card along the way, but really the only one of note is the fact that, at the end, Barney has to kind of rescue Jim and Willie as they're wheeling Gunther Schell out of the building. You could argue that, Jim being put in a casket and them losing track of him was also, something that was unexpected. I'm sure it was unexpected, but it certainly didn't seem to set the plan back any at all. Also, I would say that this episode suffers from what a lot of episodes suffer from like this, where there is a fairly large cast. There's a whole problem of multiple antagonists. And I've mentioned this in several episodes before. It's difficult to kind of pinpoint who the bad guys are. Other than the doctor, Dr. Hargreaves, the other guys don't really seem so bad to me. They don't really do bad things, not so overtly. They're not good guys in any sense of the word. But, and again, maybe I'm just kind of getting a little bit too jaded or used to, the fact that we've got a lot of, what appear to be sort of white collar criminals that we're dealing with here who don't really seem like bad guys. I don't know. Maybe that's just me. But I do feel that there are too many of them. And so it's hard for us to kind of pinpoint, the feel and the emotion that I think is necessary for a good episode. Again, it's so much easier to do it when there's somebody who's identifiable and say, that's the bad guy. I just got that vibe from this episode. Last thing I want to point out, not anything bad or good, but just something that was kind of funny. Towards the beginning of the episode, when Barney shows the bartender at the Wheelhouse place Jim's driver's license. It shows his name as Philip Brady, which is correct. That's the name that Jim is using in this episode. But the signature on the driver's license shows Tim Rayburn. And if you recall, that was the alias Jim used in the last episode of season 6 called Trapped. So they basically used the same card over again, and somebody just maybe liquid papered and typed over it, but they forgot to change the signature. I'm, of course, hoping that nobody would notice, but, you know, one of those things. Anyway, I think that's what I have to say for this one, and I'm going to stick by my grade of the C-. Thank you guys, as always, for watching. Please like this episode review video as we head through Season 7 here. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and please leave your comments. I look forward to them. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time.